teaching about the Armenian Genocide. This video is made possible with support from the California Department of Education as part of the Content, Literacy, Inquiry, and Citizenship Project, which provides professional learning and resources to help teachers and school administrators successfully implement California's History Social Science framework. The video was developed in partnership with the Sacramento County Office of Education and the Genocide Education Project. Welcome to this overview of the Armenian Genocide and its connections to California's History Social Science standards and framework. I'm Roxanne Makashjan, Executive Director of the Genocide Education Project, and it's my pleasure to share some ideas that'll help you decide when and how to teach this important topic to your students. The Armenian Genocide is addressed in California's framework in the 10th grade. It's estimated that California is home to between 500,000 and 1 million Armenian Americans. Many are direct descendants of the few survivors of the genocide carried out by Ottoman Turkey in 1915. The first wave of Armenians began to arrive in Fresno, California in the late 1800s after escaping early pogroms in their ancestral homeland, ruled by the Ottoman Empire. Many more Armenians arrived after the genocide. The term genocide itself was coined by legal scholar Raphael Lemkin in 1944 after studying the destruction of the Armenians and later the persecution of the Jews under the Nazis. In 1946, the United Nations adopted the term genocide and later passed the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. In order to initiate positive change, we must understand the historical facts and the causes and conditions that bring about genocide. Equipped with this knowledge and acting as informed citizens, students can then take a proactive approach to stopping genocide. Genocide has accounted for the murder of more than 50 million people in the 20th century and continues to haunt us today with many lasting effects. But genocide doesn't happen in an instant. There's a progression of prejudice, discrimination, and early acts of violence that take place. Understanding the warning signs and early stages of genocide is crucial to understanding genocide and effectively preventing it. The Armenian Genocide was carried out in the western part of historic Armenia, in present-day Turkey. It's often referred to as the first modern-era genocide and can be taught as a model or prototype for a new era of human rights abuses. Enabled by the new tools and methods of the Industrial Revolution, mass killing was now possible on a much greater scale and with much more speed and efficiency. One example of the horrors of the Armenian Genocide can be found in this image of human remains in the village near the city of Mush in the province of Bitlis before being set on fire by the Turks. Only 12 people in the village survived. So you may be asking yourself, where's Armenia? Armenians are indigenous to the lands now in eastern Turkey and somewhat further east towards Russia. At one time, the Armenian kingdom spanned the entire region between the Mediterranean, Black, and Caspian Seas, north of Syria, Iraq, and Iran. Present-day Armenia, bordered by Turkey, Iran, Georgia, and Azerbaijan, is the only part of historic Armenia not under Turkish rule during World War I, and where Armenians survived. And who are the Armenians? It's important that students understand that Armenians and other targeted groups are not just defined by genocide. The Armenians are an ancient nation that has existed since before the 1st century of the Common Era. The Armenian language is unique, with its own distinct letters and grammar. And Christianity is a deeply rooted aspect of Armenian history and culture. Armenia was the first nation to adopt Christianity as a state religion in 301, setting it apart from most of its neighboring peoples. In 1918, after the Ottoman Empire was defeated in World War I, the Armenians to the east, who had been within the Russian Empire, declared independence. But that ended quickly with the Russian Revolution and then a takeover by the Soviet Union in 1920. 70 years later, in 1990, Armenia was the first of the 15 Soviet republics to declare independence from the USSR. The Republic of Armenia remains independent today, although it's a very small portion of that historic homeland, and relations with Turkey and its ally Azerbaijan are very troubled. The Seljuk Turks began to inhabit this region as early as the 11th century, and by 1453, the Ottoman Empire was a multinational state that incorporated numerous ethnic groups. But Armenians were the largest minority in Turkey itself. In response to their request for equal rights in the late 1800s, the Ottoman ruler initiated bloody pogroms against the Armenians. The worst, the Hamidian massacres, took place from 1894 to 96. The survivors included countless orphaned children, often barefoot and terrified, who often found shelter in local churches. In 1909, another major massacre was carried out in the city of Adana, killing 20,000 to 30,000 Armenians. With these massacres and the loss of territory in the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 13, Western powers began to call the Ottoman Empire the sick man of Europe. By the onset of World War I, the Ottoman Turks had all conditions in place to initiate a full-scale genocide against the Armenians. So how do we teach about the Armenian Genocide? In the framework on page 344, you'll find the question, what were the consequences of World War I for nations, ethnic groups, and people? This can help students understand the political, social, and economic reasons for and effects of the Armenian Genocide. Consider focusing your study of World War I and the Armenian Genocide through these lenses. Let's take a closer look at what happened. Carried out primarily between 1915 and 1918, the Armenian Genocide is considered by historians the greatest human rights crisis of the Great War. It's an essential component of World War I history. Beginning on April 24, 1915, the Turkish leadership who had taken the reins of power from the reigning Sultan arrested several hundred Armenian civic, intellectual, and professional leaders. They were transported to the countryside and killed. Then orders went out to all regional governors and mayors to round up their Armenian residents and deport them into the Syrian desert, as shown in these images, with only the provisions they could carry. The Turkish officials told Armenians they were being moved only temporarily for their own safety. The deportees died gruesome deaths along the way. Many were physically violated, robbed, and killed. Many children were abducted and forcibly Turkified. The majority died of starvation and exposure. By 1918, most of the Armenians were dead. Under the orders of Turkey's new leader, Mustafa Kemal, nicknamed Ataturk, any remaining Armenians were expelled, as were the Greeks and the Assyrians, who had also suffered genocide by the hundreds of thousands in this region. By 1923, a 3,000-year-old civilization virtually ceased to exist. 1.5 million Armenians, more than half of the Armenian population living on its historic homeland, were now dead, and their personal and community properties, their schools, hospitals, churches, were stolen by the government, transferred to Turks, or destroyed. The Armenian Genocide marked a new threshold of man's inhumanity to man, made possible through new technologies like the telegraph and railroad, which allowed for swift and effective organization of mass crime. Shown in this photo from 1915, Armenian Genocide victims were being deported on the Baghdad Railroad. The California Framework notes another important aspect of this international catastrophe: the massive efforts by Americans to rescue Armenians after the war. Studying this aspect allows students to consider more modern instances of genocide and identify similarities and differences. The Near East Relief Foundation in the United States and others around the world provided food, shelter, and job training to the survivors. This historic fundraising poster reads, "They Shall Not Perish, Campaign for $30 million. American Committee for Relief in the Near East." International diplomats who were stationed in the Ottoman Empire reported on the atrocities, such as Lord Bryce of England, whose document is shown here. Journals and newspapers were reaching larger audiences, and the Armenian Genocide made front-page news from Paris to Spokane, as shown in this journal cover, which reads in French, "The Massacres of the Armenians." So by examining the political, social, and economic causes for the Armenian Genocide and international response to it, students can begin to address compelling questions. How did the decline of the Ottoman Empire affect the Armenians? Why did the Ottoman Turks decide to carry out the Armenian Genocide in 1915? Was there international awareness of the Armenian Genocide? What was the international response? Were the perpetrators of the Armenian Genocide punished? Was justice served? Does genocide denial lend itself to the ongoing victimization of a group of people? Could a study of the Armenian Genocide shed light on more modern instances of genocide? By studying the Armenian Genocide, teachers can help students connect the past to the present. In an example from the Constitutional Rights Foundation, another compelling question that students can consider is, should other countries intervene when human rights are violated anywhere in the world? Through this, students may examine the international response to the Armenian Genocide, and students can also study a current example of genocide, such as Darfur, and simulate a United Nations committee examining the world's responses. Relating their study to the Armenian Genocide, students can discuss what the world's responses to genocide should be today. By investigating the Armenian Genocide during their study of World War I in 10th grade, students will be better prepared to understand the context for America's response to the genocide, as well as to Hitler's Holocaust, which they'll learn about in 11th grade. In fact, Hitler himself alluded to the Armenian Genocide on the eve of his invasion of Poland, reassuring his generals, saying, "Who after all speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians?" We hope we've provided a helpful overview of the Armenian Genocide, its role in social studies education, and some tangible ideas for how you can include it in your curriculum. To find more resources for educators related to implementing California's History Social Science Framework, please visit the Content Literacy Inquiry and Citizenship Project website at californiahss.org. And go to the Armenian Genocide page to find a full list of credits related to the materials in this presentation. Technical production of this video was performed by the Sacramento County Office of Education's Internet and Media Services Department.